Going on, man? It's your boy Butler, man. It's the best day of my life because tomorrow's not promised. Go ahead and do your little dance while they still playing your song. And today we are going to touch on.
But first, we start with breaking news. The state has suspended the execution of a Georgia death row inmate.
Stacey Humphreys was set to be put to death this Wednesday for the murder of two Cobb County real estate agents. The new order from the State Board of Pardons and Paroles does not say exactly why his execution is being suspended. His attorneys argued he should be protected under COVID-era rules that put some executions on hold. He was convicted for the 2003 murders of Cindy Williams and Lori Brown. They were shot at the real estate office where they worked.
A Georgia man's execution will move forward after a last-minute attempt to stop it. 52-year-old Stacey Humphreys is scheduled to die next Wednesday for the 2003 killings of 33-year-old Cindy Williams and 21-year-old Lori Brown, both shot to death at the real estate office they worked at in Atlanta. During COVID, Humphreys' execution was put on pause. His attorneys argued to put Humphreys to death now would violate his constitutional rights.
Let me take you somewhere where most of us will never go. A concrete cell, fluorescent lights, a steel door, a man waiting. Not waiting for court, not waiting for parole, waiting for the state to decide the day he dies. In the state of Georgia, under the authority of the Georgia Department of Corrections, there are men housed on death row, some guilty beyond question, some with stories complicated by trauma, some who maintain innocence, but they're all human. This isn't about excusing crime. This is about understanding what happens when society decides that a human being no longer gets to exist.
To due process and equal protection. But yesterday, a federal judge was unconvinced. And there is still some uncertainty about that execution, with Humphreys requesting to sit upright during the lethal injection because of health issues. If he is not allowed, his attorneys say that the execution will cause undue harm and stress, and we might see another push to put off the execution.
To one of the top stories tonight on 11alive.com. A convicted killer was supposed to be executed tonight, but at the last minute, his life was spared.
That's right. The State Board of Parole stepped in and called off the death sentence. This is an incredibly rare event that has not happened in Georgia in years. 11 Alive's Ryan Kruger shows us why this man's life was spared and why others were not.
For 3 decades, Jimmy Metters has sat on Georgia's death row, but with only a few hours to spare came relief. The State Board of Pardons and Paroles commuted his death sentence to life without parole. 11 Alive legal analyst Latonia Hines reviewed the clemency order.
And they talked about the fact that he had no prior, a really minimum criminal history, and that he had been a model inmate during those 30 years.
Since the death penalty was reinstated in the 1970s, 75 people have been put to death in this state, with only 12 commutations. The most recent ones were Tommy Waldrip in 2014 and Daniel Green in 2012. So why was this execution thrown out? The clemency order says because in 1989, when he was convicted, life without parole wasn't an option.
And the jurors that were spoken to about this, they said had they had this option, that probably would have been what they would have gone with.
Metters was convicted of killing a store clerk. Meanwhile, back in November, Ray Jefferson Cromartie was executed in Georgia for also killing a store clerk. But Cromartie had other violent crimes on his record, including another shooting. Metters didn't have a violent record.
At the times when the jurors were considering the case, they didn't have the option that you have now in death penalty cases of being able to make that decision of life without the possibility of parole.
And Aisha, I also spoke with a law professor. Now, he told me ever since death penalty cases, they've actually dropped dramatically ever since the state of Georgia started allowing life without the possibility of parole. That happened in about the mid-90s.
So people are now probably thinking ahead how many death row cases might be commuted given this precedent that's now been set.
Yeah, that's a little tough to tell. So state law happened in 1995. Now, it went through all of Georgia death row inmates. There's about 10 guys on death row convicted before 95, but it really depends on what happened then. In this case, the jury said with the Metters case, you know what, if life without parole was a possibility, that's what we would have given it for. If some of the guys were like that, they might have a chance, but otherwise, if the jurors felt like death was the only option, then more than likely that's what's going to happen.
Then that's what they have. All right, thank you so much, Ron.
Gina Hoffacker leads Georgia.
Let me be clear. If you're out here breaking the law, stop. It's not your calling. It's not your talent. You're eventually going to get locked up. If you're thinking about pulling the trigger, stop. That's not your calling. It's too many cameras, bro. If you're letting anger make decisions for you, shout it, just breathe. Just breathe, bro. Breathe. Because death row is not a movie. It's not a record label. It's not a chain or a pendant. It's not dramatic music in a courtroom. It is decades in a cell, replaying the worst moment of your entire life. And to the young men watching this, especially the ones who feel like the streets are calling, and they gonna keep it real, and they some real street niggas. The streets do not visit you on death row. Nobody glamorizes a lethal injection. Accountability matters. But dehumanization, that's something different. We can hold someone responsible and still recognize they are humans.
Catholics Against the Death Penalty. Her group urges lawmakers to take another look at the state's execution laws. The Catholic Church opposes all executions, arguing they take away a person's chance to change, repent, and make amends.
Because victims and victims' family members have said that they waited 20, 30 years for this to happen, and that it happened, and they said that didn't fix what I was told it would fix.
The Department of Corrections has set December 17th as the execution date for 52-year-old Stacey Humphreys, convicted of killing 2 real estate agents at a Cobb County model home back in 2003. Prosecutors say Humphreys forced the women to strip and hand over their PIN numbers before shooting them, later telling investigators, "I know I did it." Supporters of capital punishment argue this case shows why the death penalty exists. Georgia's method, 5,000 milligrams of pentobarbital, is at the center of the debate. The state calls it reliable, but critics say it could leave a person conscious, trapped inside their own body, feeling like they're drowning.
Tonight, Georgia carries out its first execution of the year, putting to death a man who fatally stabbed his neighbor 25 years ago. Authorities say 45-year-old J.W. Lefford Jr. was pronounced dead at 1:17 a.m. at the state prison in Jackson.
Some breaking news right now. A Thomas County judge has issued a new execution order for Georgia inmate Ray Cromartie. The new execution date is set for November 13th. Cromartie was sentenced to death for the 1994 murder of a South Georgia store clerk. On Wednesday, he was granted a provisional stay of execution hours before he was scheduled to die. You'll find more information on 11alive.com.
The psychology of waiting to die. Imagine waking up every day knowing that the state has legally decided that you are no longer fit to live. Not today, but soon. Years pass. Appeals, denials, more appeals, more waiting. Psychologists have stated that prolonged death row confinement does to the mind severe depression, paranoia, disassociation, emotional collapse, institutionalization so deep that freedom becomes terrifying. Some call it death row phenomenon. A human mind was not built to live under a countdown. It's one thing to die suddenly. It's another thing to anticipate your execution date. That kind of waiting changes a person.
It is one of those final morbid details before an execution. Marion Wilson Jr. has picked the menu for his final meal. He was convicted in 1997 for the murder of Donovan Parks in Baldwin County. The execution is set for June 20th. He chose pizza, buffalo wings, ice cream, apple pie, grape juice. If the execution happens as scheduled, it'll be the 51st inmate put to death in Georgia. There are 49 other men and 1 woman now on Georgia's death row.
For a death row inmate kicks off tonight's speed feed.
The State Board of Pardons and Paroles will meet a week from today to consider clemency for Scotty Morrow.
He was convicted of murdering 2 women in Hall County in 1994. The Department of Corrections is scheduled to execute him by lethal injection May 2nd in Jackson. That will be a week from tomorrow.
A friend of
The execution for a Georgia man convicted of killing a little girl is temporarily on hold. Virgil Presnell Jr. was set for execution tonight at 7 p.m. But late last night, a Fulton County Superior Court judge issued an order temporarily stopping the state from moving forward. Presnell's lawyers say the execution date violates a written agreement with the state. That agreement puts executions on hold during the COVID-19 pandemic. Presnell was convicted of killing an 8-year-old girl and raping a 10-year-old girl back in 1976.
An execution date has been set for a Dougherty County man convicted of a 1994 murder. Marcus Ray Johnson is scheduled to die by lethal injection on November 19th at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson. That will be at 7 o'clock in the evening. Johnson is accused of stabbing an Albany woman 41 times with a small, dull knife.
At 4 o'clock, we're hearing from an attorney for a Georgia death row inmate. The U.S. Supreme Court granted Keith Tharp a temporary stay of execution last night, just hours before he was scheduled to die. The attorney told Channel 2's Audrey Washington the sentence was tainted by one juror's racial bias.
This is information the jury should have had in determining whether the client lives or dies.
Even criminal defense attorney Brian Kammer thought it would be a tough fight for his 59-year-old client, Keith Leroy Tharp.
We are one of the top executing states in the nation.
After sitting on death row since 1991, on Tuesday, more than 3 hours after he was scheduled to be put to death, the U.S. Supreme Court granted Tharp a temporary stay of execution.
We have occasionally, very rarely, gotten stays from other courts. But from the Supreme Court, it's extremely rare.
Tharp was originally charged with the murder of his wife's sister-in-law, Jacqueline Freeman, in Macon. Kammer says within 3 months, his client was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death.
His attorneys did virtually nothing to prepare for the case or investigate Mr. Tharp's background.
After years of research and investigating, Kammer, the director of the Georgia Resource Center, argued that his client's death sentence was poisoned by one juror's racial bias towards African Americans and Tharp himself.
Those views directly impacted his decision regarding sentencing. And that's impermissible in our system of laws. Everyone has the right to a fair and impartial jury.
Right now, Tharp remains in prison. As for what happens next,
my understanding is that the court is going to take its time, essentially, to decide whether to grant full review of this issue. And we'll just have to see what happens.
Kammer says next a conference date will be set to discuss the petition and to decide whether to grant review. He says that process could take weeks, maybe even months. In Northeast Atlanta, Audrey Washington, Channel 2 Action News.
Death row inmates in Georgia are typically housed in extreme isolation. Limited contact, minimal physical interaction, little sunlight, controlled movement. Isolation itself has been shown to cause psychological deterioration. When we place someone in a concrete box for 23 hours a day for years, sometimes decades, what exactly are we doing? Punishing the crime or breaking the mind? And here's the uncomfortable question. If someone is mentally destroyed by decades of isolation, who are we executing at the end? The person who committed the crime or a psychologically fractured version shaped by the punishment itself?
Let's get you up to speed on this Friday night. A Thomas County judge has issued a new execution order for Georgia inmate Ray Cromartie. The new execution date, November 13th. Cromartie was sentenced to death for the 1994 murder of a South Georgia store clerk. On Wednesday, he was granted a provisional stay of execution, hours before he was scheduled to die. You'll find more on his family's fight to have new evidence examined, all on 11alive.com.
Developing at 11 last-minute appeals to stay the execution of Georgia's oldest inmate on death row. He is set to die Tuesday, and tonight we're hearing unique perspectives on the case of condemned murderer Brandon Jones. Channel 2's Carl Willis talked to the former prosecutor who rejected Solomon's latest argument.
Although he was sentenced to death in 1979, Brandon Jones is still alive. And at 72, the oldest inmate in the history of Georgia's death row. But after having his death sentence vacated in 1989 and decades of appeals, he's set to be executed Tuesday.
The person that did this
finally get his justice. For the first time, we're hearing from the son of Jones's co-defendant, Van Roosevelt Solomon, who was handed a much swifter punishment, being executed back in 1985 for the murder of Roger Tackett. Solomon's son believes Jones was the ringleader in the crime and led his father to destruction. How was a murderer still living when my father did what he's supposed to do? And Jones's lawyers are not done yet. They say his execution would be unconstitutionally disproportionate and excessive, saying a murder during a business robbery is no longer the worst of the worst crimes.
It stays with you forever.
The former DA who responded to the scene that night disagrees.
This was a very cruel and brutal killing. I just believe in the punishment that the jury found after a fair trial.
We visited the site of the murder. The old Tenneco station is now a shell station. Investigators say Roger Tackett came back here to close up and do some paperwork so that he could spend Father's Day with his daughter. That's when investigators say Jones and Solomon beat, robbed, and murdered him, leaving his daughter fatherless.
To look in her face after all these years and say, you know, there may be some finality to it, it means the world.
It's long overdue. It's time for him to go ahead and make his peace. Now, Solomon's son still believes that his father was forced into the crime at this business against Mr. Tackett. He tells me he wants to be present and a witness at the execution that is scheduled for Tuesday. Reporting live in Cobb County, Carl Willis, Channel 2 Action News.
When someone is sentenced to death, we often focus on two sides: the victim's family, the offender. But there's a third group: the mother who still writes letters, the child who grows up visiting through glass, the siblings who says, he did wrong, but he's still my brother. Punishment radiates, grief multiplies. Justice should center victims, always, but it should not blind us to collateral humanity. Supporters of the death penalty say, it's justice, it's deterrence, it's closure. Opponents argue, it risks executing the innocent. It disproportionately affects the poor. It depends on legal resources. It costs more than life imprisonment. But beyond statistics, here's the deeper question. What does it do to us as a society to ritualize execution? When the state straps a man down, inserts IV lines, and administers chemicals to stop his heart, that is not an abstract concept. That is a human body shutting down on purpose. We should not discuss that casually.
Now, a convicted killer is in the final minutes of his life. The state Supreme Court this afternoon denied his last try to stop his execution. He killed two women in Gainesville 25 years ago.
New at 6 Channel 2 investigative reporter Mark Winning talked to the man over the phone. So, Mark, he told you what he's thinking about. Here are his final thoughts.
And a woman who has provided us recordings previously of high-profile murders offered to bring us into a conversation with Scotty Garnell Morrow. Our conversation on my cell phone took place soon after a key decision by the Board of Pardons and Paroles went against him.
Are you prepared to die?
I don't want to die, but I'm at peace. If God so wills it, that it's going to be done. I don't want to, but if that's what happens, I hold no ill will in my heart against anyone.
You're in the death watch cell as we speak.
That is correct.
We spoke by cell phone. He indicated he expected his final words to come from his heart, and he maintained he was speaking from his heart in this interview.
You're not saying anything justifies or excuses what happened, is that correct?
That is correct.
But it's clear two hearts no longer beat on this earth because of what Scotty Darnell Morrow did. Convicted of murder in the 1994 shootings of ex-girlfriend Barbara Ann Young and her friend Tanya Woods in Gainesville.
Have you ever denied that you murdered Barbara Young and Tanya Woods?
No, I've never denied that. I took full responsibility from the beginning.
Why did you do it?
It was a crime of passion. I lost control of my emotions.
In fairness, a court document says the state introduced evidence the murders, quote, were not impulsive, but rather that on the morning of the murders, petitioner took a loaded gun, drove to Ms. Young's home, kicked in Ms. Young's door, exchanged words with Ms. Woods, and began his killing spree.
I don't have sympathy for Scotty Morrow based on the crime.
Rebecca Herrera three-wayed us into the conversation. She says she's an aspiring journalist working on books and a podcast based on her recorded conversations with high-profile killers.
Getting inside the minds of a killer.
I'd like to give my very deepest and sincere apology to the Young family and to the Woods family. And I would also extend a very deep apologies to Miss Latoya Horn. I hope that you find it in your hearts to forgive. I ask God to give me peace and comfort him, and he will do that.
Now, another woman was reportedly shot and survived. Ms. Herrera says she began reaching out to killers as she came to terms with getting shot 6 times herself, which happened in 1986, by a gunman who killed her close friend, the killer's girlfriend, holding his baby in front of Ms. Herrera. And again, we didn't arrange this through official channels. Ms. Herrera arranged it.
Mark Winnie, heavy stuff. So, Mark, you've been in the exact room where the man will be executed tonight. What do you recall from that space?
Well, this was years ago, but I remember coming from the death cell, just feet from the room where the execution was to take place, seeing a crudely cut shaft in the ceiling, which was very thick. Perhaps to give the killer, I surmised, a last chance to see the sky. Reporting live, Mark Winnie, Channel 2 Action News.
In many capital cases across America, including Georgia, socioeconomic status plays a role. Who can afford expert attorneys? Who gets public defenders, overloaded with cases? Who has access to investigators? Justice is supposed to be blind, but money sees very clearly. And when death is the sentence, inequity becomes irreversible.
All right, something to ponder, Mark. Thank you.
Our top story after spending a short while deliberating this afternoon, jurors found Donnie Rowe guilty on all counts for the 2017 murders of 2 Georgia corrections officers.
Jurors asked to see some footage from the prison bus cameras again during their deliberations. Attorneys for both sides gave passionate closing arguments earlier today. Molly Jett is following the case in Edenton.
Shortly after the defense counsel's first and only witness, both the state and the defense counsel spent about an hour saying their final words to the jury. Shortly after 10, District Attorney T. Wright Barksdale started the closing statement section of the trial. Barksdale defined malice murder for the jury, then defense attorney Adam Levin began. Levin began with saying Donnie didn't shoot, he didn't intend to kill him, and Donnie is guilty of felony murder, but felony murder does not equal malice murder. Judge Brenda Trammell brings Barksdale back to the stand. He tells the jurors it was almost as if they trained for the day, trained for this opportunity, adding it took less than 1 minute for them to enter the gate, kill, and escape. Eventually, Barksdale raises his voice and uses Donnie Rowe's belly chains to demonstrate what happened to Christopher Monica more than 4 years ago.
He hit Christopher Monica with it. You seen it. Tee off. Don't tell me that's not malice. Don't tell me what his intent was. Because the video shows it, ladies and gentlemen. He grabbed those belly chains and he swung it like a baseball bat.
Barksdale finished his last statement to the jury by acknowledging Curtis Ballew's and Christopher Monica's family as they sat in the courtroom. In Eatonton, Molly Jett, 13W MAZ News.
Now, instructions to the jurors told them not to look up any coverage of the case. Court is scheduled to resume Friday morning. Again, a guilty verdict today on all counts just delivered a short while ago.
We have breaking news tonight. A judge just halted the execution.
Overnight, 2 death sentences have been carried out, the first since that botched execution in Oklahoma.
Now to some breaking news here at 5. Just in our newsroom tonight, the planned execution of a convicted Cobb County murderer has just...
We're following breaking news from overnight out of Georgia. The state carried out its first execution.
Ray Cromartie was granted a last-minute.
Georgia gets ready for his first execution this year. A Cobb County man convicted of murdering.
Jackson, Georgia, right now, the state is preparing to execute a man convicted of robbing and killing an off-duty prison guard in Milledgeville. This happened 22 years ago.
Breaking news right now to pass along the execution.
judge has denied a stay of execution for a Georgia woman who is scheduled to die tomorrow. Kelly Gizendanner was sentenced to death for convincing her lover to kill her husband back in 1997. Her execution has already been postponed twice during a winter storm and after a controversy over the injection cocktail. She will be the first woman to be executed in Georgia in 70 years. Gizendanner's lawyer says that he will appeal today's ruling.
Options for a Georgia death row inmate, they are running out. Ray Cromartie is set to die by lethal injection next week. Today, the Georgia Supreme Court declined a request for new DNA evidence in the case. Elvin Lopez joins us now in studio. And Elvin, you sat down with the inmate's brother for an exclusive interview.
Yeah, that's right, Jeff. In a twist not even his older brother could predict, death row inmate Ray Cromartie won't seek clemency to reduce his sentence or to spare his life. His brother Anthony claims it's because Cromartie doesn't want to plead guilty to something he says he didn't do.
As he said from the beginning, he claims his innocence. He didn't commit this crime, and he's willing to stick to that until the day of his execution.
52-year-old Ray Jefferson Cromartie is set to be executed October 30th, sentenced to die for the 1994 shooting.
We saw this footage, so I'm gonna.
In more local news, clemency was denied for death row inmate Marcus Ray Johnson.
I got the paper today, and the article Brunswick News has in there about him. I told my brother, I said, if I knew that this was going to end up like this, I'd have done everything in my power to keep that child with me. But, you know, he might have got in trouble, but it would have never been that kind of trouble. It just hurt me to my heart.
Live at 5, a Georgia man is pleading for one more chance just 24 hours before.
Okay, so now, our final story. I want to talk to you about a name that shook the state of Georgia. Troy Davis, convicted of killing a police officer in 1989. Over time, multiple witnesses recanted their testimony. Supporters argued the evidence was weak. Global attention grew. Celebrities, religious leaders, activists, people across the world, including myself, called for reconsideration. But in 2011, the state of Georgia carried out his execution. Whether someone believes he was guilty or innocent, his case forced a national conversation. What if we get it wrong? Because unlike prison time, you cannot appeal death after it's done.
He's set to be executed.
Atlanta News First anchor Sean Gables is live at 5. The new details about the state's first execution. This will be the first one in more than 14 years.
Is the first one in 14 years, Blair. Tori, this is William James Pye. Take a close look here. He was convicted and sentenced to death for the 19...
We came in, the warden was in the room with him, another prison official, a medical attendant plus one that was off to the side, and then Troy Davis strapped to the gurney. The warden read while we were there, read the order from the Chatham County judge, asked Troy Davis if he had any statement. Davis made his statement. They ordered the procedure to go on. He asked if he had a prayer first. There was no response. Warden stepped out of the death chamber, and then it started.
The lethal injection started at 10:53. He turned his head very slightly to his left the same minute that the lethal injection started. The next minute, I have him blinking his eyes a little more rapidly for a very brief few seconds. I have him squeezing his eyes shut for maybe a second and then opening them again. And then at 10:54, about a minute after the lethal injection started, I have him appearing to yawn. And then around 10:55, it started slowing down. And 10:58, which was 5 minutes after the lethal injection started, they did a consciousness check to make sure he was unconscious before they start the next two lethal injection drugs that paralyze his body and stop his heart.
It was somber. I mean, none of these are easy. It was very quiet, much more so. The only sound where we were sitting was the sound of the air conditioner. People weren't moving. I mean, it was not even some casual movement. I think everybody in there understood the enormity of what was going on and acted accordingly. It was very, very quiet, very respectful, and very somber.
The final hours before execution are procedural. Medical staff, legal observer, spiritual advisors, last meal, final statement. Think about that. A final statement. Imagine choosing your last words. Not metaphorically, literally. And then silence.
We begin this morning, though, with the controversial execution of Troy Davis. The convicted Georgia cop killer was put to death late last night after the Supreme Court turned down his final appeal. As CBS News correspondent Mark Strassman reports, the condemned man maintained his innocence to the very end.
He said to the people who are about to take my life, may God have mercy on your souls and may God bless your souls, and then that was it.
Minutes after Troy Davis was executed, witnesses described his final words outside the Georgia State Prison, where a lethal injection ended his life, but not the controversy over his death. The death row.
So this is what I'll say. I was at this execution. This is the only execution I've ever attended, and I was not permitted to go into the building. I was outside with the protesters. Mind you, this was 14 years ago, and I believed in my knowledge of some of the facts and the people who made initial statements that Troy Davis was innocent. And so I traveled down to Jackson, Georgia, and I protested. I protested amongst a number of people from the community, people of all races, people of all walks of life, for the possibility to spare the life of another human being. I remember Big Boy and Killer Mike being present. I also remember a guy with some overalls who reminded me of Hosea Williams being on the scene as well. And at some point in time, he advised that we all get down and pray. And mind you, I'm a few years from Jackson State Prison. When I say a few years from Jackson State Prison, at some point in time, I was housed at this very facility, and now I'm outside protesting and asking for the life of another individual who was housed here. So I did as I was instructed, man. We prayed, we sang, we hymned. And at some point in time during the praying, they told us to stand up, and they announced that the execution of Troy Davis had been prolonged or canceled. And bro, I cried. We celebrated, man. I was like, oh man, prayer works. Like prayer really do work. And I just felt something come over me. I was like, man, I'm crying uncontrollably, man. And I was just happy, and I was just like, man, like we helped a human. Like we helped a human. And the crowd dispersed. And then me and my sister, we was coming back from Jackson, headed back to Atlanta, bro. And I'll never forget this, man. Ryan Cameron got on, was that Ryan Cameron? Ryan Cameron got on the radio and said that they have just executed Troy Davis. So they told us that they were counseling the execution so that we could clear the space. I'll tell you this, as a person who was there on the scene, I have never felt such defeat in my life. I felt empty on the inside, bro. A lot of things I didn't understand about the system, I was beginning to, come abreast with how shit was really ran in the South, or just in these United States.
Inmate was convicted of the 1989 killing of Mark McPhail, an off-duty police officer shot dead trying to break up a brawl involving a homeless man. Davis maintained his innocence until his final breath. And over the years, supporters worldwide insisted doubt about his guilt should block his execution. 7 of the prosecution's original 9 witnesses recanted their testimony. No physical evidence ever linked Davis to the crime.
Are you giving up? No!
But various courts reviewed Davis's conviction over the years and upheld it. And the slain cop's family insisted Davis was guilty and deserved to die. Hundreds of protesters gathered outside the prison, and police, some wearing riot gear, and prison authorities geared up for confrontation as the original 7 o'clock execution deadline approached.
He killed a man, he killed a police officer. So that's what we're here for, see justice delayed finally come to an end and support McPhail's family.
Suspense built even more. The U.S. Supreme Court delayed the execution while considering whether to grant a stay. But just after 10 p.m., the court ruled unanimously not to block his execution. And just before 11 p.m., over howls of protest, Georgia executed the convicted cop killer. Mark Strassman, CBS News, Atlanta.
Joining us from Washington now with a closer look is CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford. Jan, a lot of the supporters, the protesters there, had really latched on to the fact that 7 of the witnesses recanted, yet as Mark pointed out a number of times, this ruling was upheld, and this was a unanimous decision from the Supreme Court last night.
Well, that's right, and that's important to keep in mind. Even the 4 liberal justices on that Supreme Court said last night that Troy Davis did not deserve another stay, which of course paved the way for his execution. And lower courts at the state and federal level, they've repeatedly upheld this conviction, saying that the evidence was sufficient. One federal judge even said that Troy Davis's arguments that he was innocent amounted to smoke and mirrors. So he's had multiple chances to prove his innocence over the years, and he's always lost at every level at the courts. And last night, his legal options just ran out on him.
Jan, thanks. Jan Crawford in Washington.
The weight on decision makers, judges, jurors, governors, execution teams, they are human too. Someone signs paperwork, someone inserts the IV, someone flips the switch. We often talk about the condemned, but rarely about the psychological burden on those tasked with ending life. Because capital punishment doesn't just affect the person executed, it affects everyone involved in carrying it out. I have a warning for the streets. That warning is this.
Night after the Supreme Court.
To the young man watching this, there's nothing tough about dying in prison, especially in a prison chamber. There's nothing honorable about your mother crying outside a facility while lawyers file last-minute appeals. Anger is temporary, shouting. Prison is not. Death is final. Emotional intelligence is strength. Walking away is power. Thinking before acting is maturity. Do not put your life in the hands of a jury. We are capable of great violence as humans, and we are capable of great mercy. The death penalty sits in the intersection of justice and vengeance. The question is not whether crime deserves consequence, because it does. The question is whether the ultimate punishment elevates us or hardens us. Are we safer because we execute? Does the family feel that justice has been upheld? Or are we simply continuing cycles of irreversible harm? A victim lost their life. A family lost a loved one. An offender sits in the cell. A mother still prays. The state prepares paperwork. And society debates. But at the center of it all is one undeniable truth. Every person involved is a human, flawed, capable of harm, capable of change, capable of error. So before we decide who lives and who dies, we should be absolutely certain. And even then, when we should move with humility, because justice without humanity becomes cruelty, and humanity without accountability becomes chaos. We must find a balance. If we're going to hold people accountable, let us do it with wisdom. And if we're going to protect society, let us do it with integrity. And if we are ever given the power to decide life or death, let us remember we're human too.
Court declined to intervene. Convicted cop killer Troy Davis was put to death by the state of Georgia.
News 18.